Chances are there were no cornfields right there 210 years ago. Calvin Castine at Bob Venn Park on Friday the 13th day of September 2024. And we're about to head for Beekmantown to do our annual coverage of the Battle of Culver Hill, which took place as part of the British invasion that started right here in Champlain. We're looking at Dewey Tavern, which was a critical part of that British invasion and the entire War of 1814. Looking at Pliny Moore's diary. Pliny Moore, the founder of the town of Champlain. Clinton County was founded on March 7th, 1788. Consisted of 3 towns, Champlain, Plattsburgh, and Willsboro. Willsboro, for the most part, is now Essex County. Plattsburgh and Champlain have given way to many towns, and including those in the county of Franklin County, and also back in 1788, Champlain also included Alberg and Islamont, Vermont, among places on the Vermont side, present Vermont side of the border. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about 1814 and the British invasion. And looking at Pliny Moore's journal, it says August 28th, British Indian force came to Champlain. August 29th, all peaceable except for a drunken Indian. But on September 4th, British Army, about 14,000, passed on to Chazy with 16 pieces of cannon, and reportedly about half of those troops camped here on these grounds and on into the village of Champlain, which is to the west of us beyond the northeastern Clinton Central School area. Then it says September 6th, battle at Beekmantown. That's the one we're going to commemorate at Culver Hill. September 11th, Battle of the Fleets. MacDonough took the ship, the brig, and 2 sloops. September 13th, British Army, that's today, passed in retreat except 1 brigade in Champlain. So the British returned here 210 years ago today after the defeat in Plattsburgh. There were land forces that weren't defeated, but when the naval forces were defeated by Commodore MacDonough on Lake Champlain, the land forces decided it would be a lost cause for them to continue, so they retreated. They stayed here, portions of them. The British Army left Champlain on September 25th. I'm looking at the Town of Champlain 2000 book here, and let's see what it says here. It says more than half of the 14,000 men camped at Dewey Farm on their march to Plattsburgh in 1814. On retreat from Plattsburgh, as many British wounded as possible were brought into the inn and made comfortable as human skill could make them. Those who died were buried on the place. When they were about to resume their march back to Canada, the British officers left their dispatch box at the tavern. So, very shortly, as we're speaking here on this Friday, within the next week or so, there will be 2 historic markers put up here in Bob Venn Park. One commemorating the burials taking place here, and others the events that happened in and around Dewey Tavern. So we are moving onward, heading south as the British did. We'll be passing through Chazy and then going to Culver Hill, where they always have a very impressive ceremony. So we're leaving here at Bob Venn Park right now. We're now in Chazy on Route 9 next to Riley Ford. And this is the Scott Home, 1814 British headquarters in Chazy village under General Prevost with his staff of 10 officers prior to the Battle of Plattsburgh. Officers were camped here next to Riley Ford in Shazy. And now Judy's holding the camera and we're looking at the law office, former law offices, obviously, of Julius Caesar Hubbell. This was his home, and just up about 50 feet to the south of here is the former Shazy Library where his law offices were, and this is another spot that the British kind of overtook on their trip south to the Battle of Plattsburgh. If you're ever driving down Route 22 here in the Beekmantown area, between Beekmantown and Plattsburgh, visit this little area here. For many years, for decades, this monument was buried alongside the road, just about in that general area. And when we first started covering these, we would come here and have a roadside ceremony with that monument hidden in the brush over there. Now when they were redoing Route 22, the town got together. I'm not sure if Gary Vancour was the historian at that time, but they motivated the state of New York to help build this. They didn't put all the funds in, but the state did a lot of this and relocated that monument and made this a beautiful little area here along Route 22 that you can visit throughout the year. So Gary Vancour is about to start the program here. This is co-sponsored by the town of Beekmantown in conjunction with the 1814 Commemoration Committee. Reading what the monument says. It says Culver Hill, September 6th, 1814, once again 210 years ago. Near this spot fell Corporal Stephen Partridge of the Essex County, New York State Militia, also some Lieutenant Colonel James Wellington from Britain, and it's a little hard to read this, John Sharman of the British Army. So for many years, relatives of Colonel Wellington would come from England to attend these facilities. I don't believe they are here this year, but they made the trek over here for a good number of years, and they were certainly here for the 200th anniversary, and which is already 10 years ago, which is hard to believe, back in 1814. So a good turnout here as always, and a picture perfect day in the North Country. They couldn't ask for better weather than what they're getting right here. The bagpipers sitting over there, Jerry Tatro and Alan Walker. Jerry said this might be his swan song. He might not be doing bagpiping here next year because it's, like many of us, Jerry Tatro is not getting any younger. So they'll have a flag ceremony over to our far right, and they should be beginning this program momentarily.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to, I can't remember how many Culver Hill ceremonies we've had. 21st? All right, the 21st. First time we had it was over in our neighbor's yard, and the monument was teetering on the edge of a little precipice, and there was no shoulder, and nobody got injured or killed. Amazing. But here we are today. I have my copy that has all of my cheat sheet notes on it. So I'm going to start the day off by saying if you're not in the shade, feel free to shift around. We don't have assigned seats. And as the sun goes, keep shifting.
Shifty crowd.
I'd like to introduce the Deputy Supervisor for the town of Beekmantown for the welcome. Sam Dyer.
First of all, I'd like to thank Gary. He's been very instrumental in not just this ceremony today, but in the Culver Hill ceremonies from the past. You know, he mentioned where we've come from and where we're at. And there's a gentleman that's going to speak after me that's not going to take very long, but the state of New York was very instrumental in this park, and it's nice to see what happens. You know, we're not walking up the side of the road. We do have sheriff and state police here today that, Gary, they were not existent before, but you know, it just, we've got a beautiful area, we've got beautiful weather, and the attendance is very, very good. You know, I know we've lost some people since we've started, but you know, I think I want a round of applause for Gary and his staff that's done this. You know, it's a kickoff for the Battle of Plattsburgh, but and Beekmantown is very glad to have Gary with them. So I'm going to leave you with that today. Thank you.
Sorry, Sam, I had a chuckle at staff. But I do want to, I'm going to use that as a segue to thank all of the volunteers. Because if it wasn't for the volunteers, which come every year and do this, some of them have done it for almost every single year. And some of those people were here that cleared the brush along the side of the road so that we could even see the monument. And some of the people are neighbors who worked so hard to maintain the identity of this battle site. So it's not just one person. And the staff are all freebies, and we really appreciate it. Have a round of applause for all of the volunteers, all of them, the bagpipers, the flag people, the cannoneers, everybody is a volunteer. Thank you. So, I just had to check. Anybody who does one of these ceremonies realizes that things change by the minute, sometimes by the second. So I want to make sure I still had Boy Scouts here. And what we'll do is they are members of Troop 46. The Mark Sand is their scoutmaster, and they're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance as we have the flag raised, and this is the Stars and Stripes.
The Stars and Stripes is the flag that existed back in 1814. This is the flag that the Star Spangled Banner was written about. About the same time as the Battle of Plattsburgh was happening, the events around the area that the Star Spangled Banner was written were also happening. So,
as the flag is attached, you'll notice there's a difference in this flag than the one that you're familiar with. In 1814, the flag consisted of 15 stars. We had 15 states at that time, the 13 original colonies and 2 more, and 15 stripes. It was after this that they stopped adding stripes and just kept adding the stars, because it would have been very thin lines. So this is called the Star Spangled Banner, named after the poem that was written and the song that was sung after Baltimore, because this was the Stars and Stripes flag that was waving after that battle at Fort McHenry.
again, roughly the same time as stuff happening up here.
Scout salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
And that flag was donated by Woodmen of the World.
Thank you very much.
Woodman Life, Chapter 462.
John Santana, and I think is Matt there? Yeah, Matt Boire. They're the, and more scouts for the official flag. And I would like to introduce Jerry Tatro and Alan Walker, who have come every year, and they're going to be doing the salute to the Royal Fendersmith. Thank you. We have some special guests today. We have a couple listed that are not able to be here, but I'm going to start out with the person who has been extremely supportive of the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration over the years, in particular this year, a large grant of money. And he has shown up here time after time, no matter how much we pick on him, make fun. He's a great, great guy. And I just told him that he's always going around and checking out all the restaurants in his district, the Assembly District, and everywhere he's having food. And I said, you can't eat all that food or you would not be looking as trim as you are. He says he eats most of it. I am jealous with envy. Our Assemblyman, Billy Jones.
Thank you, Gary. Your introduction is always entertaining. Let's just put it that way. Well, Sam had alluded to how this house started out 21 years ago, and how he had said at the time there was just kind of a cow pasture at one point. So I think we owe a great big congratulations to Gary, the town, and Sam even mentioned the state of New York actually did something pretty good, which proves sometimes the state can do good things as well, helping out with the wall and helping out with this. But I think everybody deserves a big congratulations to where this ceremony and where this history and telling how this area played a significant part in our nation's history. And you know, the more we can do that, the better off we are. And we need to continue to tell that story on the significance that Culver Hill, that certain other areas in our region have played in shaping our nation's history, because it really has. And every year at Culver Hill here, also at the Battle of Plattsburgh, wherever I'm at, Riverside, other ceremonies, I always learn something every year. So if you can teach a farmer from Chateaugay every year something about the history of this great battle that was here in our region, you're doing a good job. And we need to continue to educate not only our people but the people all around the state and the country on the significance that this area played, and that these brave young men here at Culver Hill and in our region did to help our nation and really save our nation to what it is today. And Gary's going to give us a brief 95-minute history lesson. He narrowed it down from his regular 84 pages to 43 this year, so we're getting there. But I also want to say it's great to have our friends from across the pond here with us too. Once we were enemies, but now we have the strongest friendship out of anybody in the world. And I think that says a lot about the way history can play a part in shaping our future. So thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I also did learn a few other things. We have the Atwood family here as well. I learned a lot about the history that their ancestors played here in this area. So you can teach a farmer from Chateaugay new things every year. It's always great to be here. Thank you very much for all that you have done. And Gary and his tremendous staff.
I can give it and I can take it. Mark Henry sends his regrets. He's doing legislative business, and Dave Bazio as well. However, I do want to point out that year after year we have who is now another county legislator from Area 1, Calvin Castine, and I asked if he would like to say a few words, and he does. He wants to say a few words. I told you, monitor and adjust.
Even though I'm wearing my honor flight hat, I'm going to take off my legislator hat and put on my town of Champlain historian hat and congratulate the town of Beekmantown historian has done over those 21 years. I think I missed one of these. I was on my way here, and there was somebody in distress along the highway, so I didn't quite make it here. But I've been to every one of these, and Gordy Little and I started covering the Battle of Plattsburgh in 1997 before they had their first parade. That was the first year Gordy worked with me at Hometown Cable. So we've been very much part of promoting this history, and it's very, very important that we keep this history alive, and I applaud Gary for doing that. Before I came here, I stopped briefly at Bob Venn Park in Champlain, which is directly across the road from northeastern Clinton, and hopefully within a year or two we'll be getting back. Years ago they did have ceremonies there that preceded this, and we had ceremonies in Chazy, and we showed the path, because this battle didn't just happen in Plattsburgh as we're seeing here today. It started when the British and their allies crossed the border in Champlain, and they were there. They first showed up on August 28th, and they left there on September 25th. So this Clinton County was occupied for 4 full weeks. So it's important that we remember that. So we have Woodman, who's provided that flag up there. Also, it's about 2 historic markers for the Bob Venn Park, and those will be put up very shortly. And of course, Dewey Tavern is there. And Dewey Tavern, which is right in that intersection, is where the British troops met, and that's where they stayed after they retreated from here. They took their wounded, and the ones who died are buried there in that cemetery, which is long gone now. We no longer know exactly where they're buried, but they were buried there. So we're hoping to help promote this history, and looking for Gary and his staff for guidance is a great way that the town of Champlain will get back into the stream of things. Thank you.
Gary, remember, he started.
I'm going to raise the microphone up because I saw him speak yesterday, and he had it bend over quite a bit. And I'm tall, but not that tall. But I have a son who will tower over him, so. Our next very special guest has offered to say a few words. Now, I don't know what it says about a person, but he comes here as the defeated person from the Royal Navy, and then he comes back the next year. Now, maybe he was following orders where they said, you must go back once again and face those people. But from what I understand, he not only requested, but he also made arrangements that he could come back yet a 3rd year and even longer. Now, I'm not going to tell you there's any graft involved, but he has been enticed by Michigans. I taught him 3 years ago how to order them properly. He's a quick study. His wife Lorna, not so much with the hot stuff, but we're going to find one that's sweet and not hot. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Lieutenant Commander Douglas Laird of the British Royal Navy.
I follow orders from Gary, by the way, so I'm told to come back, and I do. But I do come back voluntarily. We are a voluntary service at the end of the day. And I have turned in to Gary, because I write my notes, and I've got 2 or 3 pages of notes. So unlike the great Billy Jones, who can turn off a very good speech without any notes, I follow in Gary's footsteps. It is, as always, a pleasure to be back here at Culver Hill again to speak, and thanks again to Gary. I said yesterday at the Riverside ceremony how amazing the people of the town of Plattsburgh and the local area are, and we've made some real friends for life here, which is ultimately why we come back. And you know, Gary's certainly one of them with his wife. So again, thanks to Gary. We always have a great weekend, even though you all tell me where I've lost. I always have a great weekend. But I think that's what this is all about, right? It's about making friends and paying respects to those that have sacrificed, and I think that's one of the things that I think that make my country and your country so great. I said it's my last year here. We've been here for 3 and a bit years, and we come back. Hopefully next year there'll be another person stood here, not as good looking as I am, but he'll also be continuing the tradition of inviting the Royal Navy up to speak here. You wouldn't have thought so, as kind of Gary alluded to, going back to the 6th of September 1814. where Beekmantown and Culver Hill played a huge role in hitting the British and kind of defending the line on that bloody day, with a loss from the British side of 3 officers dead, which was a kind of a big deal certainly back in those days, and 100 casualties, including Halsey's Corner there in those figures. But again, like the Royal Navy, after the sea battle, the dead on both sides are treated with respect and honour. And on that note, having spoken with Gary, I'd just like to kind of maintain that theme just throughout, a couple of minutes as I speak here. That whilst we were enemies from 1812, and of course the period before where you kicked us out, some 40 years prior, but actually we became friends very quickly again. The revolution officially ended in 1783. We re-established relations in 1785. At the Battle of, the War of 1812, which didn't finish really until 1814. We re-established relations in 1815. And we burnt the White House down. And a year later, we re-established relations. And the bilateral cooperation kind of reflects the our common language, our ideals, and our democratic practices of our 2 great nations. And I kind of paraphrase a bit, but I think post your independence revolution and the War of 1812, some better scholars will phrase it better than me, but I think ultimately it was like, hey, we've had a fight, we like each other, I think, so can we just stop doing these horrible things to each other and go back being good friends? And I think that's ultimately what happened. As I said, I'm paraphrasing. There's many better historians that can say it better than I can. Sounds like family. You're absolutely right, Billy. Yep. I think from a historical perspective, we all know, the World Wars, the Normandy landings, the Germany first policy, which was a big decision certainly for the US, because you were ultimately, we were as well, but you had 2 fronts to deal with: Korea, two Gulf Wars, Afghanistan, and NATO. I think we know the history, but I also just want to, touch a little bit on what that means today and where we are today in that special relationship. So I'll just kind of reel off a couple of things just to kind of highlight how close that relationship is and how far we've come since 1812. So I'm here as a kind of military exchange. There's an exchange agreement between the UK and the US. There's exchange agreements across the world between the US and a number of nations, but none so is bigger than the British one. The exchange agreement we currently have from the UK perspective, around 1,000 personnel in the US, and the US has over 10,000 in the UK, with 1,000 on the exchange agreement. You've still got bases in the US, and you're still part of our training pipeline as well. We share a lot of things, including in my world in the submarine service, nuclear weapons. So we do a lot of work there as well. And it isn't just a liaison job. You get these jobs where you kind of go and assist. Because there's other units required. But I've been in this job for 3 years. I work directly for the US Navy. I don't work for my Navy. And the exchange agreement for the US guys in the UK, again, is the exact same. They work for the Royal Navy, and you report to that chain of command. The USS Winston Churchill, which is a US Arleigh Burke destroyer out of Norfolk, Virginia. Ever since that ship was commissioned in 1999, it has a British navigator on board, navigation officer. And that's been through 1999 and onwards. That's the only permanent foreign embarked officer that the US holds. And you fly the Royal Ensign off the USS Winston Churchill as well. And comms of NATO, again, I'm sticking with the submarine theme a little bit here, purely because it's easier for me. But again, that's headed by a US Admiral. Comms of NATO is the submarine element of the NATO alliance, and his deputy is a UK submariner as well. And they work out of Northwood HQ, which is just outside of London. So a lot of what you see on TV in the news is politicians and people with a lot more gold on their shoulders than me. But I can assure you that relationship runs very, very deep, and it's very, very important. And it includes places like Culver Hill and Beekmantown, and long may that continue. And just my own personal experience, I've been very privileged to, I've been to Normandy, I've seen the beaches, I've seen where the dead have been laid to rest, in Normandy, in Waterloo, in Point Loma, San Diego, where there's a number. And I'm certainly not comparing, what happened in those conflicts, but I think it's very special what happens here is that we all get together as friends, And we recognise that there was some good and there was some bad, and we recognise the sacrifices that were made, and we're friends afterwards, which I think is very, very important, and I think is very special, particularly to a town like Plattsburgh, because I don't think that happens necessarily in other parts of the world. So it's very special, and long may that continue. Thank you, Gary.
It's very hard to pick on him when he's so nice. But he was in Hawaii a week ago.
Yeah, 2 months.
Yeah, 2 months he was in Hawaii and with the subs, sitting on Waikiki Beach, was it? After he'd been on the sub. But he came back. Thank you very much. I would like to do some little promotion here. We have commercial TV, so you always have to have a little promo, right? Tomorrow, I believe it is, Saturday at 10:30 at Trinity Church, Doug is going to be giving a talk about Captain Downey's strategy and then the possible court-martial. Apparently, and correct me if I'm wrong, back then, if you lost a battle, you were court-martialed automatically. Is that true?
Modern day learning from experience.
Yes, it's true. I always do this, but I always think it's very important because I never overlook all the component parts of ever getting anything done. And we've had references to this park, and if it wasn't for the Fortune family donating the land and the Department of Transportation coming in and actually constructing most of what you see, if it wasn't for, since then, groups like the Lake Champlain Basin Committee, the Woodmen, who donated flagpoles and who have panels and things, what you see is a result of many, many groups working over many, many years. And it's just really, it's a community effort, and I think we always have to give recognition to that. I mean, we're getting the power right now from a long lead cord that goes over to the Connick's house. And when we started out, we were standing in the Connick's yard doing these ceremonies, and they're still helping. The brochure, the program that you should have a copy of, I think one of the best short synopsis of what happened is right from this pictorial history. It kind of tells the essence of it. And on the back page, the various people and groups that have participated, I've mentioned the Fortune family. The Beekmantown Lions Club was very, very instrumental in getting this established. That has since ceased to exist, and the Plattsburgh Lions Club has kind of picked up that goal, and members of the Lions Club are here today. Bob, Dennis, Valerie, working, helping park, etc. John Santana and Matt Dwyer, they've been here many, many years. Craig Russell. It was years ago, I have to say it was back in the late 90s that Craig and I were talking to each other and said, you know, we should try to do something that gets kids involved, a living history kind of thing. And then Kit Booth and Sally Booth, they were doing the Battle of Plattsburgh commemoration. All of these things that happened lasted for years. And now we're so glad to see that the 1814 commemoration group is picking up that and continuing to do that, because it was not a given. It was very questionable as to whether we would continue to be able to do this. But as you probably can notice, a lot of us that did that are no longer with us, or we are kind of aging out. And we need younger people to step forward. Some of those young people, hopefully the Mark Sand and his Boy Scouts, maybe this will make an imprint. And they will say, hey, you know, I went to that, I was part of that. We thank the Sheriff's Department and the New York State Police. This is a pretty quick road. People drive quickly, and when this knoll, it could be very dangerous. And having them just sit there, it slows people down a little bit so that we can come in and out of the park safely. And I have to mention my wife because she has put up with me for 52 years now. And she's always been supportive. She has been to every single Culver Hill ceremony, every one of them. And she's here again today. So let's have a round of applause for all of those volunteers. And a big one for my wife. We're also very pleased to have representation from some of the families that were here in 1814. And it's the super sleuthing of Mary Simmers, who said, do you have any information about the Atwood family? I said, well, they from West Jay-Z, yeah. And I've had their kids, because the generations are still here, and I taught for over 30 years. Well, come to find out, Super Sleuth found the documentation enough to know that yes, the ancestor of not the current Bill Atwood, but or ancestor of this Bill Atwood that's here today, had a militia group. He was Captain William Atwood, and he was in Beekmantown. And so I'm going to mention that a little bit more as we go on. So I'd like to welcome a new group of families here, the Atwood family, along with Matt, who had an ancestor that fought here, along with the Dominy family, and we have a lot of the Dominies here. And I know if I try to mention all their names, I'll forget somebody, and that means I'm in trouble. The Gardefee family has been here in the past. The Patridge family has been here in the past. They're from out of town, way out of town. We're talking about thousands of miles out of town. Ron Wood and Cornelius Stabber. All of these people, all these families had a part to do with either the battle or the raising of this monument. Billy said he wanted a cushion for his chair because he knows how long I go on. And all I can say is that because my eyesight is getting worse and worse, even though I go and spend a lot of money for these glasses, I have to have a bigger and bigger size. So there's only 5 words on each card, so don't get nervous, Bill. Every year I try to do a little different slant than the year before. And if you do this for 20, 21 years, it gets to be redundant after a while. But in the process of developing this park, we ended up getting interpretive panels. There are 3 here, and there's 1 down, or I should say up the road, north of here, right where the main road came in, where the Ashley Road meets now the Greta Howe Road. And each one of them tells a short piece of the story. Each one of them, anybody who ever done these interpretive panels, 250 words. And it's hard to describe something in 250 words. I can't say hello in 250 words. But I've kind of highlighted the different panels. And this year I said, you know, one I haven't done much at all is They Met as Enemies, which is one of the panels down here. And then I went to Riverside last night, and almost every single speaker mentioned how we met as enemies and ended up as friends. Talk about stealing one's thunder. You did it. Billy, you did it. As I mentioned, I taught school history. I don't call it history, I call it social studies. Because to me, history is very boring. But the story of people is not. It's very interesting. Life is a big soap opera. And quite often what gets put in the history books is not the colorful stories that really took place. And like Billy said, every year I learn something, and I've been at this for a while. Now, Billy, I think you were still in diapers when I was starting to teach. I'm not sure, but close. So if I can keep learning something every year, maybe this year I can give you something that you didn't know. Like I didn't know about the Atwood unit that was here. First of all, we must take note that all of this was the town of Plattsburgh. The town of Beekmantown didn't form until 1820. And so really this was the town of Plattsburgh, where the village was the town of Plattsburgh, where the city is, it was all the town of Plattsburgh. Now it stopped at Chazy. There was a town of Chazy and Champlain. And for years during the commemoration we would start the program up at Dewey's Tavern because we wanted to let people know that these soldiers that came and fought, mostly close to Plattsburgh or in Plattsburgh or the water, didn't get here by helicopter. They walked. And they walked through Champlain and they walked through Chazy, and all of those communities have a story to tell. And over the years I get to learn a bit of their stories because I attended those. So the British made use of most of the roads. I have to tell you that Craig Russell is one of the best sources of information because he's a reenactor, but he's well researched for every single group that he does. And Craig, for 2 or 3 times, walked that distance from Champlain to Plattsburgh because that's where the British Army marched. But they used any available road, and the roads were not very good. There were not even good paths a lot of times, and it had rained here pretty hard on September 4th and 5th. There are stories told by H.K. Averill in his journal about marching up to West Chazy and finding room in the Atwood Farm barn, and how they had to carefully make their way in because he was a member of the Aiken's Volunteers. These were high school kids that wanted to join, and they were too young to join, but they were allowed to. They were good shooters. They were used to shooting squirrels for dinner. And so when you have a guy dressed up in a red uniform with a big tall hat, that's not even a challenge. So they were up in West Chazy, and they came down, but they were asked to go over to one of the other routes, which is currently Route 9, and that's where one of the branches of the Army march was down what is currently Route 9. It's not exactly the same as it was then, but they came out at what was called Dead Creek, Scamotion Creek. Don't know if you know this or not, but Scamotion Creek didn't always go directly into Lake Champlain the way it does now. It curled up around where Gus's Red Hots was and then went in where about the beaches. And then later on they dug a channel to make it go more directly in there. And all along that shoreline there were confrontations and firing from gunboats out in the water and the land army shooting back. But we're here, and this is one of the main routes as well, and they split up. And they did it at Ingraham. I don't know how many of you know, Ingraham is really just a stone's throw away from what is now the town line of Beekmantown. It's in Chazy, but part of it is not. And just south of that, it was the Trombley farm for a long time, they encamped. I don't know how many of you realize that it was the War of 1812 that really unified Canada. We had been for 2 years invading Canada left and right. Each time was pure folly. Anybody who will look at it rationally will know that we were so terribly prepared, and we at one time we went up to the border and we attacked what we thought was the Canadian, the forces there, and we were attacking ourselves. I mean, it was really bad. And all of those just solidified the Canadians who had their own issues of separation of cultures. And so this group that marched in here was truly an international group. Yes, you had the Brits, the Buffs. They were the toughest there were. They had defeated Napoleon's troops in Portugal and Spain. They were veterans. They were really, really hard-nosed guys. But there were also the Voltigeurs, which were Canadian groups. There were the Demerons, which were the Swiss. They were mercenaries. They're all in Ingraham. And when you read some of the stories of the people here, they were really afraid of the Native Americans, the Indians. It wasn't that long back where there was a Revolutionary War, and this was the frontier. This was wild through here. And so these raids went back and forth, and the Native Americans fought a different kind of warfare than the gentlemanly warfare of the Europeans. And so they were afraid, and a lot of people said, "Oh, well, there were no Native Americans, there were no Indians involved." Yes, there were. Under Brisbane, and he was Thomas Brisbane, and you might have recognized that name because a lot of these guys went on to be governors of colonies. And have you ever heard of Brisbane, Australia? Well, he was here. He was over on Route 9. And he had set up communications with Alexander Macomb, who was the American general, a young guy. And very, very good. And they had established kind of like the rules of war, the guidelines. And one of the things that Macomb worried about was the Native Americans. And Brisbane made sure that those folks that were with them were not in the front line. And there are accounts from the Culvers who lived across the street in an unfinished house that some of the British and Native Americans stopped in, and they got some milk and then left on their way. That's according to the guy who was alive there at the time. So these letters were exchanged, and they set up this kind of protocol. And after the war was over, Macomb offered to do letters of introduction to Brisbane so he could come back and meet governors and part of the American leadership. That was nothing that was official. That was just two opposing generals who, after the war was over, stuck their hands out in friendship. Lieutenant Colonel James Willington, Irish guy. 1/4 of the British soldiers were Irish. I think they were trying to get rid of the poverty, and they went in the army. And he joined as a teenager. I think he was 14, maybe 16 when he was in the service. He had been one of the ones that had survived the vicious, vicious warfare with the Napoleonic troops. Robinson and Brisbane were also, but they were officers. Joe and Roy Carter came here for years. I think about 18 years. They stumbled across this. She wanted to find where her ancestor had died. They drove by 2 or 3 times because people would say, "Well, yeah, it's out there." So others said, "I never heard of it." And if it wasn't for Bill Crosby, who would mow a swath up the embankment, you wouldn't even known there was a monument there. But if you were going faster than a slow pace, you wouldn't have seen it. And so they came back the next year, and we made them part of the ceremonies. And they were here, and they laid the wreath and that kind of stuff year after year after year. And over time, they donated all kinds of money for monuments and recognitions, and they never wanted to have any recognition for that. But they're over there now, and they don't know I'm talking behind their back. But that's the kind of friendship that was made with one of the descendants of the person who was killed here. The militia, Benjamin Moores, General Benjamin Moores, he had up to 700 militiamen at East Beekmantown. That's the first conflict. The first conflict was when the British were marching down what is now the Ashley Road over what is now called Ray Brook. It was called Silver Stream. There was a patrol party that went out almost in my backyard where I live today. It was the main highway, what is now the road that goes up behind where the bus garage is. And that is where the first blood was let. With that patrol party meeting a British patrol party, I don't know how accurate numbers are, but they say that there were 3 Americans, two killed and 1 wounded, and something like 30 British. I don't know if that's exaggerated, or I don't know if that's telling what a bad shot we were, that when we did shoot somebody we couldn't kill them. I don't know. But that's where the first blood was drawn, just about 1.5 miles up the road. There's a panel there. It's right in front of where the Dominie's homestead is. That's where they came down. At the same time that this was here with Moores, with his militia, John Wool, Major John Wool, was begging Macomb, let me take some men. We got to show the British that we are going to try to stop them. And so he arrived early in the morning at East Beekmantown. Well, I got to tell you that it was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of wounded, a lot of blood, and a lot of militia decided there's a better thing to do than stand here and fight with these guys. And they took off. It's harvest time. They had families. They said no. So most of that group left. Benjamin Moores was not very complimentary of most of those militiamen. However, the militiamen always said, well, you were not a very good leader. So, you know, things never change, do they? But about 30 of them fell back here to this rise, along with the 250 regular troops, and they made their stand. Now, as the British marched down through from West Chazy, down what is now 22, they went past the house where the Dominie family lived. And we have a lot of stories about that. How it took 2.5 hours for them to march by. Can you imagine that? And the British would march, boom, 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 boom. For 2.5 hours you see these redcoats and all of the stuff going by you. And you've got what? Maybe 1,500 able-bodied men here to try to stop them? Never going to happen. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen here. They fell back. It didn't happen in Halsey's Corners, although there was a lot of bloodlet. And I saw Dick Rogowski running around here earlier. Maybe he took shade, but he's going to be there with the Halsey's Corners at 1:30 to talk about that phase. But we have the stories of Henry Dominie, and we have the stories of Nathaniel Culver, where they, and I've mentioned this before, when Willington was killed, taking a musket ball to the throat. And how ironic that this general, this officer, who had survived the most vicious fighting of the Napoleonic Wars, was taken out by a militiaman who'd never fought a war in his life. It's a good shot, though. And we also have about how the wounded would be brought into the barns and the houses and stuff like that, and wherever there was a spot, if there was a doctor, they tried to mend them. Across the street, at least I think it's across the street, Nathaniel was born, he said, in a brick house, and then he talks about the unfinished house. So there's a lot of empty space there. I don't know, did we make a mistake? Did he live there, or did he live here? But he talks about the house not being built, and so I would expect that that was a new house, because they hadn't, you know, they were living in the basement. And he talks about the two of the militiamen who were brought in that were wounded. Let me tell you, the way he describes that, I don't like getting a sliver. Are you kidding me? Now the Atwoods. According to the history of Champlain or Chazy, Nell Sullivan, David Martin, which is the Bible of the historians, sort of, for that, under the command of Colonel Thomas Miller, Tom Miller Road, those of you who are here, was Captain Atwood. Now here's kind of an interesting story. They had a group, and they had, in August, they had 12 of them were called up. Of the 12 that were called up, only 5 showed up. The others, we don't know. But we do know that by the time September 6th rolled around, they were up to 12 people and 2 officers. And according to the Sullivan-Martin book, they were, quote, participating in the engagement on September 6th at Culver Hill. That's all we got, folks. Later on, we found out that one of the members, Gardner Goodspeed, was wounded. Was that at the first encounter? Or was that at Culver Hill? Or was that at Halsey's Corners? Because the Atwood unit fell back with Wool and the rest of them into Plattsburgh, then across the bridge, and they were ripping up the planks on the bridge to stop the British, so they were on the north side of the Saranac River. I don't know, but we have a lot of questions, don't we? And where we get most of our information is from these primary sources, these personal accounts. I have to say that I wonder what's going to happen in the future, because so much of what we know are things that Averill wrote in his diary, his journal, or Dr. Kellogg, who went around in the late 1800s interviewing people that were alive and still of sane mind, as they recounted, and Dr. Kellogg wrote it down. He's on one of those other plaques. Or it's the dispatches that were sent back and forth. John Wool went on to be a brigadier general, fought in the Mexican War, Civil War. So he went from Culver Hill to a distinguished career in the military. And he wrote stuff down. What's going to happen when we don't have letters to look at or journals, because people are emailing each other and then we delete it? Or we're, as a historian, we're not going to know a lot 100 years from now of what happened with the people. You get the official records, but that's not always showing the whole picture. So as we text and email and talk on the phone, if you have a chance, write some of this stuff down. Now, I'm a great one to talk, because I have even pretend journals where all you have to do is fill in the blanks. And I haven't done it yet. And really and truly, you never know how much longer you've got. And I have to say to you that the older you get, the more you realize that you don't have as much time as you used to. But you never know. So write it down. Write down little things and pass it on along, because, all that stuff that we put on floppy disks, we can't read that anymore. All those CDs that we stored stuff on, they're disintegrating. It just, we're this electronic stuff. And there, I'll stop that. I would like to continue just briefly, Billy. I know you have something to go, someplace to go, something to eat. I only pick on people I like. I'm sorry. I saw a finger in the air. No, it was the first digit, so I know it's okay. Jerry, did you have something you wanted?
Yes, I have something I'd like to share. So,
This is Jerry Favreau, another one of these people that in her retirement has less time than she did when she was working. Did you want to say something?
very quickly. Yeah, not quite as tall as some of these other people. I'm Jerry Favreau, and I am president of the board of the Clinton County Historical Association and Museum. And I'm not on the program, and I had not planned on saying anything, but Gary mentioned a couple of things, and I thought I really should give a plug for our museum. We have Martin Aiken's rifle on display and the story of the Aiken boys. We also have Benjamin Moore's sword, and we have a mirror that was at the Dewey Tavern in Champlain. That the story is that a British soldier thrust his sword into a crate or something where the mirror was and broke a quarter off, and we have it on display. And I'd like to invite all of you to come and visit our museum and see these things. And we're open 10 to 4, including Sunday this weekend. And for people who are local, you can come. You can make a phone call. We will open for you if we're not part of it's not part of the regular open hours. And thank you, Gary, again, and all your volunteers for what you do. This is so important to capture our history. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. We got to be careful and not make this a mutual admiration society, huh? After the war was over, it's not everywhere that you would have the winning side bury the dead of the enemy with honor. And that's what happened here in Plattsburgh. And it happened almost instantly. And even people like Willington, who was buried in a garden up the road here, were reinterred in Riverside, and you had them lying, the officers, side by side. You don't see that very often. And on Crab Island, the enlisted men were buried literally side by side. There was no spacing. I mean, there were just big trenches where they were all buried. And I think probably that was a sign of the respect that both sides had for each other. And I also want to say it wasn't always smooth. You know, we talk about how right after the war we're good friends forever. It wasn't always smooth. We did build the fort, you know, up in Champlain, Rouse's Point. And then we found out we were building it in Canada instead of here. So it took some negotiations, and by the time that Fort Montgomery was finished, people were referring to it as Fort Blunder. You can still see it when you come across the Rouse's Point Bridge. You wonder, what is that stonework there? It was a fort to protect us from another invasion from Canada. And by the time they got it finished and they got it settled where the line was, we were good friends. In the Civil War, it was kind of touch and go for a while because, you know, the British, the mills got all their cotton from the South. But they respected the Union and didn't continue to trade openly. I'll say that openly, because smuggling has always been a nice pastime of particularly the North Country. We have a long history of smuggling. But it did continue. And I have to reflect now back to my personal, how did you get involved with this? One of the things that attracted me to this whole commemoration thing is because Kit and Sally Booth and the original people who started this called it a commemoration. It wasn't called a celebration. It wasn't called a festival. It was a commemoration. And the purpose was to recognize the sacrifices on both sides of the conflict. And I really, that spoke to me. And as a lot of you know, I became very, very involved with the commemoration. When 2014 happened, I was supposed to retire. And here I am, 10 years later. Slow learner. Again, thanks to my wife, who encourages me to keep doing it. Maybe it's because she doesn't want me to get underfoot in the house. I don't know. But I couldn't do it without that kind of support. And so here we are, Doug and his wonderful wife, Lorna. And we're so glad that you're here. We're so glad that you enjoy coming here. And we're going to miss not having you here because we truly are friends. Thank you. And thank you for your tolerance. All right, let's wrap this puppy up here. We always have a wreath laying, and this is a wreath that was brought by the Carters. It's a memorial wreath from the Buffs. And Douglas Laird is going to do that. And we have Carol Burley, who is a descendant of the Dominy family. And I've given them careful instructions on how to lay a wreath. It's not easy. I was asked to do it a couple of times, and I screwed it up the first 2 times. I think last night I did pretty well. We're going to lay the wreath. They're going to stand there, and if you want to take some photos, you're more than welcome. So this is in honor of both sides of the conflict at Culver Hill on September 6, 1814.
210 years and 1 week ago, as I said at the onset. the 13th, which is today. They arrived back in Champlain at Dewey Tavern. The British forces we're talking about. So I'll give everybody a chance to take a photo.
I'm going to add one thing. Last night we had a fellow who used to come to this all the time, and he left the area, and he was back. And he was a bugler. He played here many, many times. So we're going to have the firing of the salute with the cannon, and then we have Bill Long do the last post, which was the taps of the 1814 period. We'll now have Jerry and Al play Amazing Grace. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Enjoy the rest of the commemoration weekend.
That was a nice job here by Gary Van Cor and his staff of thousands. Next coverage of the Battle of Plattsburgh will probably be the parade, which is going to be taking place tomorrow in the city of Plattsburgh. Thanks for watching and supporting viewer-supported local television, hometown cable, TV worthy of your support. Thank you for watching.